The Rosicrucian and Christianity Lectures by Max Heindel. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Lecture 8. The Science of Nutrition, Health, and Protracted Youth. In the previous lectures, we have constantly tried to emphasize the value of the dense body. It is the most priceless of all our material possessions, and, strange to say, it is the one we neglect most of all. To protect worthless property, we will risk life and limb, throwing away the wheat to save the tares. But it is not our worst crime that we do that upon occasion. The greatest trouble arises from the neglect and disregard which we practice daily, from before birth to the moment of death. In the case of our cattle and horses, we are very careful regarding breeding. We see that the animals are in perfect health and seek out the mate for them which our common sense and experience tell us will bring forth best strain. We inquire carefully into the pedigree of a dog or a stallion before we allow it to become the sire of our stock, but our prospective children get not a thought. We marry for wealth, a home, social standing, etc., and not to secure a partner mentally, morally, or physically fit to be a progenitor of a more advanced generation. And worst of all, marriage is generally regarded as a license to unlimited coition, which is in many cases carried on uninterrupted through the whole period of gestation. What wonder that passion rules the child from infancy? Marriage and propagation are social duties for persons in good health and of sufficient means. But excess is a crime, a cancer which gnaws at the vitals of society as the vulture at Prometheus's liver, and cannot be too strongly condemned. Thus our forefathers have brought us into the world with many a serious handicap in life, and we are hampering our children in the same way on account of lack of thought and self-restraint, yet wondering why there is sickness and pain. If we would take half the care in the selection of mothers and fathers for our children that we do in the case of our animals, there would be a great improvement, particularly if the mother were left unmolested during the period of gestation. But it is not enough that we bring our children thus handicapped into the world. From earliest childhood, we ignorantly implant habits in them which are deleterious to health and well-being, particularly by giving them wrong food, teaching them to live to eat instead of eating to live, to look more to the things that please the eye than wholesomeness, inculcating a taste for highly seasoned dishes which arouse the passional nature most potently. Suppose a builder should try to erect a house from old rags, tin cans, offal, and refuse of every kind, and live in it. Would we be surprised if it fell down and hurt him? No. We should be surprised if it did not, and when the catastrophe occurred, we should say that he had himself to blame for flying the fact of nature. So with ourselves, when we employ analogous methods and build our body from any kind of materials without regard to their fitness, we alone are to blame for the ills resulting. Sickness, decrepitude, and infirmity are all effects from causes which may be in great measure avoided by a tithe of the thought and care we give to the 1,001 things of minor importance. Let us try to outline the underlying causes which produce disastrous effects. There is no faith, once for all delivered, in any department of knowledge. Truth is many-sided, and new phases are constantly opening to the investigator. Yet there are certain basic laws and facts which are ever true, and it is with such facts that we will deal, because they apply to all without exception, and will be found to be conducive to health in all, though health is a strictly individual matter, independent of looks, only conditioned by whether the ego feels at ease in the body. If the ego feels diseased, the body is ill, no matter if it looks what we call the picture of health. When the antenatal life of a human being commences as an embryo, it is a small, pulpy globule composed of albumin, white of egg. Then a change occurs. There appear various particles of more solid substance within it, which grow larger, firmer, and finally touch each other. At points of contact they form joints, and gradually the skeleton is formed. At the same time the pulpy matter becomes more organized, and we have the fetus, a child in the womb. The growth continues, and birth reveals the child as a soft little body, yet immensely more dense and solid than the embryo. Infancy, childhood, and youth bring increased consolidation, and in time the acme of solidity is reached in an old age and ended by death. In each of these epochs of human life, the body is hardened beyond what it was previously. The flesh and the bones, the tendons and the ligaments, every part alike becomes hard and inflexible. The fluids also thicken. The joints no longer are oiled by the synovial fluid because it gets too thick to flow, and the joints become stiff and begin to creak. The blood, which in infancy and youth flowed unimpeded through the arteries, veins, and the minute capillaries, which in early life are all as elastic as rubber tubes, flows slowly and stagnates in the contracted, indurated, and inflexible arteries of old age. In consequence, the body bends, the flesh shrinks for want of nutrition, the hair falls out, and last, the tired heart can drive the blood no longer, so the body dies. The whole course from the womb to the tomb is one uninterrupted process of consolidation, and infancy, childhood, youth, maturity, and old age are but so many stages of the way. The only difference between the body of youth and age is that one is soft and elastic, the other hard and rigid, and the vital question is, what is the cause of this ossification, and can it be controlled or at least minimized so as to prolong the halcyon days of youth? To the latter part of the question, it may be answered without qualification that it is possible by knowledge to minimize the consolidating process and to live our appointed time to greater advantage if we live unthinkingly as most people unfortunately do. In regard to the cause of ossification which hardens the tissue of our bodies, chemical analysis has proved that any part of tendon, flesh, blood, urine, perspiration, saliva, and, in fact, any part of the body we examine, contains an immense amount of calcareous or chalky matter not present in childhood, so that while, for instance, the bones of a child are composed of 3 parts of gelatin and 1 part of phosphate of lime or bone matter, in old age the proportion is exactly reversed, so that there is only 1 part of gelatin to 3 parts of bone matter, which is the reason why an old man's bones will not knit when broken. A child's bones knit readily because there is plenty of the cementing material in its bones, and very little of the phosphate of lime, or bony matter, sulfate of lime, or plaster of Paris, and carbonate of lime, or common chalk, which are the choking substances, principally causing rigidity and old age. The question now arises, what is the source? Whence do we get this calcareous choking matter? It seems to be beyond dispute that all the solids of the body are built by the blood, which nourishes every part of the system, and that all the body contains must first have been in the blood. The blood is renewed from the cheel from the chyme, and ultimately from the food and drink. Food and drink, then, which nourish our bodies, must therefore at the same time be the source of the earthy deposits which choke our bodies and produce old age and decrepitude. Chemical analysis also bears out this inference, for it has shown that the arterial blood which comes fresh from the heart, pure and red, is heavier with earthy matter than the venous blood which contains the impurities of the system. Thus it is proven that the life-giving stream which flows through every part of the body to renew and build at the same time is the bringer of death, for in every cycle it leaves behind a fresh accumulation of choking lime compounds to harden the tissues. This is the Waterloo upon which all perpetual life theories meet their doom, for it is necessary to eat, to live, yet every morsel of food has in it both life and death. While we, therefore, cannot escape taking death-dealing substances into our system, we may at least regulate our food so that we take as little of it as possible, for there is a great difference in the amount contained in different foods. Powdered cocoa, for instance, is one of the most nourishing foods, but at the same time a most potent clogging agent, containing 3 or 4 times as much ash as the worst of all other foods. Chocolate, on the other hand, is still more nourishing than cocoa and contains no earthy matter at all. Anyone knows that as long as we can supply fuel to a fire and keep it free from ashes, it will burn and heat. So with our body, which is a chemical furnace, as long as we give it proper food and are able to eliminate the refuse by way of the kidneys, skin, and rectum, we can keep it in health and vigor. By taking only such foods as contain the smallest amount of earthy substance, we may put off the evil day when rigidity and old age take the place of elasticity of youth. It lies with ourselves to do so, and the tables of food values sent out by the U.S. government give the chemical constituents of the various foods. Speaking broadly, and from the chemical standpoint, there are 2 classes of food. 1, the carbonaceous, including the sugars and fats, and 2, the nitrogenous, including the proteins. The carbonaceous foods are the fuel whence we derive heat and muscular power. They come from the starch and sugar in vegetables, also from butter, cream, milk, olive oil, nuts, fruits, and the yolk of eggs. These foods contain very little earthy matter. Many of them, particularly green, fresh vegetables and fruits, are entirely free from it. The proteins are the material we use to repair waste of the body incident to work and use. They may be obtained from lean meat, such vegetables as beans, peas, etc., from nuts, milk, and white of egg. Most people feel that a meal without meat is incomplete, for from time immemorial it has been regarded as an axiom that meat is the most strengthening food we have. All other foodstuffs are looked upon as mere accessories to the one or more kinds of flesh on the menu. Nothing could be more erroneous. Science has proved by experiments that invariably the nourishment obtained from vegetables has a greater sustaining power, and the reason is easy to see when we look into the matter from the occult side. The law of assimilation is that no particle of food may be built into the body by the forces whose task that is, see lecture number 6, until it has been overcome by the indwelling spirit, because he must be absolute and undisputed ruler in the body, governing the cell lives as an autocrat, or they would each go their own way as they do in decay when the ego has fled. It is evident that the dimmer the consciousness of a cell is, the easier it is to overpower it, and the longer it will remain in subjection. In lecture number 3, we saw that the different kingdoms had different vehicles, and consequently a different consciousness. The mineral has only its dense body and a consciousness like the deepest trance state. It would therefore be easiest to subject food taken directly from the mineral kingdom. Mineral food would remain with us the longest, obviating the necessity for eating so often. But unfortunately, we find that the human organism vibrates so rapidly that it is incapable of assimilating the inert mineral directly. Sale and the like substances are passed out of the system at once without having been assimilated at all. The air is full of nitrogen, which we need to repair waste. We breathe it into our system, yet cannot assimilate it or any other mineral till it has first been transmuted in nature's laboratory and built into the plants. As we saw in lecture number 3, the plants have a dense and vital body which enables them to do this work. Their consciousness, we also saw, was a deep, dreamless sleep. Thus it is easy for the ego to overpower the vegetable cells and keep them in subjection for a long time, hence the great sustaining power of the vegetables. In animal food, the cells have already become more individualized, and as the animal has a desire body giving it a passional nature, it is easily understood that when we eat meat, it is harder to overcome these cells, which have animal consciousness resembling the dream state, and also that such particles will not stay long in subjection. Hence, a meat diet requires larger quantities and more frequent meals than the vegetable or fruit diet. If we should go one step farther and eat the flesh of carnivorous animals, we should find ourselves hungry all the time, for there the cells have become exceedingly individualized and will therefore seek their freedom and gain it so much the quicker. That this is so well illustrated in the case of the wolf, the vulture, and the cannibal, which have become proverbs for hunger, and as the human liver is too small to take care of even the ordinary meat diet, it is evident that if the cannibal lived solely upon human flesh instead of using it as an occasional tidbit, he would soon succumb, for while too much of the carbohydrates, sugars, starches, and fats do little if any harm to the system, being exhaled through the lungs as carbonic acid gas or passing as water by way of the kidneys and the skin, an excess of meat is also burned up, but leaves poisonous uric acid, and is being more and more recognized that the less meat we eat, the better for our physical well-being. Looking at the matter of flesh-eating from the ethical side also, it is against the higher conceptions to kill to eat. In olden times, man went out to the chase as any beast of prey, rough and callous. Now he does his hunting in the butcher shop, where none of the nauseating sights of the slaughterhouse will sicken him. If each had to go into that bloody place where all the horrors described in Upton Sinclair's books are enacted day after day to be able to satisfy an abnormal, injurious habit which causes more sickness and suffering than even the liquor craving, if each had to wield the bloody knife and plunge it into the quivering flesh of his victim, how much meat would he eat? Very little. In order to escape doing this nauseating work ourselves on occasion, we force a fellow being to stand in that bloody pen day after day, killing thousands of animals every day of the week. We brutalize him to such an extent that the law will not allow him to sit on a jury in a capital case because he has ceased to have any regard for life. When he gets into a fight, as is often the case in the Stockyard district of Chicago and other slaughter cities, he always uses the knife and always unconsciously uses the peculiar twisting cut which makes his stab fatal. It is no use to say he need not do it. When hunger drives, a man will refuse no means of livelihood, and we, society, who demand this food, force some fellow being to supply it and are therefore responsible for his degradation. We are our brother's keeper both individually and collectively as society. The animals which we kill also cry aloud against this murder. There is a cloud of gloom and hatred over the great slaughter cities. The law protects cats and dogs against cruelty. We all rejoice to see the little squirrels in the city parks come and take food from our hands, but as soon as there is money in the flesh or fur of an animal, man ceases to have regard for its right to live, and becomes its most dangerous foe, feeding and breeding it for gain, imposing suffering and hardships upon a fellow being for the sake of gold. We have a heavy debt to pay to the lower creatures whose mentors we should be, whose murderers we are, and the good law which works ever to correct abuses will also in time regulate the habit of eating murdered animals to the scrap heap of obsolete practices, as cannibalism is now. We are not advocating a vegetarian diet for everyone. Long practice of flesh-eating, and particularly the temperamental peculiarities of many people, make it unsuitable for them to do without meat, yet others, like the writer, find it no trouble to live and grow fat on 2 meals of meatless dishes. Eggs, fish, and other low forms are necessary to some. Others can live months or years on fruit. Diet, like health, is determined individually, and no general standard can be set up. At the same time, it may be safely said that the less meat we can along with, the better our general health will be. But if we want to do without it altogether, it is absolutely essential that we should study a table of food values so that we get the necessary proteins from the vegetables we eat. No man can go to the ordinary table and get sufficient nourishment if he eats only the vegetables provided as accessories to the meat. He must have beans, peas, nuts, and the like foods which are rich in protein to take the place of the discarded flesh, or he will starve. As a hint to brain workers, it may be said that carrots contain about 4 times as much phosphoric acid as any other food. The leaves can be used as salad, and they have 3 times as much phosphoric acid as the carrot itself. More dangerous to man than any food as a clogging and hardening agent of the system is water. It does not matter how clear and pure it looks. There is an enormous amount of the lime compounds and magnesia in the best we have, and neither filtration nor boiling will take it out. The amount of mineral in the water is easily determined by the way our tea kettle furs up, and it is a mistake to think that the deposits come from the water that we pour out of the kettle to make tea or coffee with, for it is the solid remains of the water that has evaporated as steam. The water left is harder, if anything. The only thing that enables us to live beyond childhood is the enormous eliminative power of the kidneys. Were it not for them, we should be old in infancy, and if we want to preserve health and youth in old age, we must cease drinking and cooking with this death-dealing fluid, using for all internal purposes only distilled water, which is absolutely free from the injurious lime compounds. The only solvents of a permanent, beneficent nature which the writers know are buttermilk and the juice of grapes, obtained preferably by eating the grape or the juice taken unfermented. A systemic course of treatment with grape juice or buttermilk will open up the closed capillaries and stimulate the blood, so that even aged persons whose flesh has dried up and shrunk will again fill out and take on the look of youth, provided they are not of a too worrying, pessimistic nature, for nothing will avail against such a temperament. That and fear and ignorance in the selection of food are in fact the most productive causes of sickness and the most obstinate foes of the physician. There are 2 great aids to health which enable us to get so much more benefit from our food that all who desire to get health or to keep it ought to employ them. Their names are thorough mastication and enjoyment. They will do more for the welfare of the body than all the drugs or doctors in the world, and like all other habits, they can be cultivated. The quick lunch counter is one of the greatest sins of our nation. A man runs post-haste from his office to the high, uncomfortable chair found in these places. In 5 minutes he swallows as many courses, rushes back to his office, and then wonders why he feels uncomfortable and drowsy. Perhaps he feels forced to employ alcoholic stimulants in order to brace up. All that can be avoided by taking time to eat in comfort. The question is not how much we eat, but how much we assimilate. When we swallow a large quantity of food nearly whole, we get less nourishment than if we take the time necessary to masticate and enjoy our food. Not that we should make it a labored process, but that we should regard eating as the welcoming of a friend into our house, where we are gladly doing all in our power to make him comfortable. Our bodies are in fact comparable to large hotels, where we are the hosts and the cells in our food are the guests. They come and go, staying a longer or shorter time, and are a profit or a loss to the proprietor according to whether he makes them feel at home or not. Imagine two hotels, one run on the basis of cordiality and helpfulness, where the proprietor meets each guest at the door with a cordial shake of the hand, and where an ideal, contented set of servants are anxious to anticipate the slightest wish of the guests. Of course, things will go swimmingly in that hotel. The guests will feel satisfied and stay long because they will loathe to leave so kind a host. Similarly, if we meet our food with the glad hand, we shall find that it will fit in easily. If we masticate it in thorough enjoyment, we are making arrangements for its comfort, as the hotel proprietor does for his guest by having a bath and other necessaries in readiness. Enjoying the food, our mental attitude is even more important than mastication. The man who finds fault with his food is like a hotel proprietor who would meet his guests at the door with a scowling face and ask, "What do you want here? I don't like you. I have to take in guests such as you in order to keep my hotel running, but I want you to know that I don't like it." What wonder if travelers who were forced to enter such a hotel should get angry, cause trouble, and try to get away as soon as possible? What wonder that the man who sniffs and snorts at his food gets indigestion? Whose fault for his condition but his own? Fault-finding and hate drive the good of our food away from us just as much as they estrange us from friends. Enjoyment of food and friend will knit the ties with both closer. As the amount of work we may do in the world, both spiritual and material, depends upon the condition of our bodies, it is of the greatest importance that we cultivate health and prolong youth to the limit of our allotted stay here, if it is possible. By following the general directions here given, it will soon be perceived that there is an improvement in the bodily condition which will give fuller and freer scope to the mental faculties.